All right, I just started the recording, so we'll get going. We're gonna do chapter 5 today. At least get started on it. We'll see how it goes. Today has been a wild, crazy, running everywhere kind of day. I've been putting out fires since I woke up. So if I'm a little all over the place, you'll have to bear with me, but I'll get through it as best I can, I promise. So let's share the screen to, ooh, there's stuff on here I didn't even do. To this one. Okay. So chapter 5 is all about, okay, you guys remember the title of the book and the title of this class, if it's not that exactly, Effective Management and Therapeutic Recreation Service. This is to set you up to be able to help do some of the things like I've been doing today, put out some fires and solve some problems and deal with conflicts and make important decisions that affect, more than just yourself. So this chapter is about decision making, problem solving, managing conflict. And let me tell you, in any managerial position, you will deal with all of these things. Lower level management to upper level management. And the lower level will actually deal with more of this directly than the upper will. And that's why they have the lower and middle management, to be that buffer where they don't have to deal with all the little petty everyday stuff that you're gonna get. Let's see here. So this one is just critical thinking. Manager's time is spent exploring issues, making decisions, and solving problems. Now you're also going to spend some time actually, being engaged, being on the floor, being active in what you guys are doing. But you do have to have time set aside for exploring issues, looking for problems, making decisions that are going to be, put out there to fix these, and then actually putting all that together and coming up with a solution to solve these problems. So in order to do that, you got to use critical thinking, and you got, and what you have to consider and look at, that you have a range of alternatives and new ways of accomplishing unit goals. So critical thinking is where you look at the pros and cons, basically. This is what is going to be positive about this. This is what could be a negative. So you have to think critically. You can't think it's my idea, so it's perfect. You have to look at it through a critical eye. So think of it in that way, as far as like critical thinking. You're putting your own, you have to be critical of even your own ideas. That being said, that's where that range of alternatives and new ways of accomplishing goals comes in. Your initial thought might not be the end all be all fix all. You might need to have more than one plan. Effective decision making and problem solving use critical analysis, which is a little more than critical thinking. Critical analysis is where you take your critical thinking and actually you might have to get a piece of paper and look at the pros, cons, think about what's going to be the which one's going to win out. And when you're trying to make a decision, analysis is taking the things that you thought about and really diving into potential outcomes. And what you see is that effective decision making and problem solving, they're developed through experience over time. Just like, most of you have had 372, where we talk about, leading a group activity or providing a recreation therapy activity, and you'd be nervous the first time, and it's just human nature. Some people wouldn't. Some people love that stuff. Nothing they like better than being up in front of people doing something. But most people are nervous. We'll be nervous at first. The second time you do it, now if you really screwed up the first time, you might be more nervous the second time. But if you lived through the first one and it went pretty well, the second time you should be a little less nervous. Then the next time a little less. And before you know it, you're not going to be, it gets better through time. Just like your ability to make effective decisions in a timely manner based on critical thinking gets better through time and through practice. So as far as managing decisions, you have to give yourself alternatives. And then as the manager, somebody has to pull the trigger, right? Somebody has to say, this is what we're going to do. This is the direction we're going to go. As a manager, that's what you have to do sometimes. So you choose a preferred course of action from the alternatives, from the choices that you have there. And they're either routine or unique, depending on the situation. Decision-making conditions range from certainty to uncertainty, which is in parentheses here. It says the manager may or may not know the outcomes of choice. You better have an idea. You might not know the exact outcome, but you better have done enough analysis and thought process when you're making decisions to have a general idea of what your outcome is going to be. It's not just like, hey, let's try this. Maybe it'll work. Maybe nobody will die. I mean, you know what I'm saying. You don't go that haphazard with decisions. You think things through, and you may not know exact outcomes, but you need to have a pretty good idea. So when you're making decisions, some of the guidelines that you can go by, websites and manuals have policies, procedures, and rules to guide decision-making. Kind of like, you can find anything on the internet now, right? Man, the light in my car the other day, it was telling me that it was time for me to go in for my service, my 30,000 mile service or something like that. My car is running fine. I don't have a bunch of extra money right now. I'm tired of getting in there, and every time I get in, it ding, 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 and it has the triangle, service light. I got on YouTube. I found out how to turn that thing off, and in about 3 minutes it was off. And now I got 30,000 miles before that thing's going to do it again. Long story short, sorry, got on a tangent, but websites and manuals that you can find on the internet's possibilities are endless. You can find anything. You can find things to help you guide yourself in making decisions, policies and procedures, rules that you can use to help guide decision making. Some other things that you can base guidelines on as far as decision making policies. What they do is they define what is permissible or what is allowed as far as action. Procedures, the exact steps to implement policy, and rules describe one course of action. And they're usually embedded in policies and procedures. And I'll tell you, most facilities have P&P manuals, or what they're called, and they cover policies and procedures. If this happens, this is what we do. And it's a whole book of policies and procedures. And they have that manual at most facilities. And that's where if that's available at your facility that you're working at, that's going to be your what you're going to use. I would go there before I'd go to a website. I'd use the agency P&P manual to help me make a decision based on what policies and procedures are already in place, because that's what's been put in and is expected by the management above you. So that's important. So when we're going to make a decision, there's steps that are involved. The first thing, we got to identify the issue. What decision are we needing to make? Then you got to explore alternatives through creative thinking. And, some people are more creative than others. Sometimes that's where it helps to brainstorm. Sometimes that's where it helps to talk to another manager who may not be in your department even. As long as you're not giving up confidential information or something like that, you can toss around and brainstorm with anybody that husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, guy that's making your sandwich at Subway, whoever might, look, if he looks like he's real smart, you might want to ask. Just saying. But identify the issue, look at alternatives through creative thinking. If you're not creative, find some other people who might help you to be more creative. That gets better through time. The more you do it, the more practice you have, the better you get. Then you look at what are your alternatives? What are our choices? Evaluate each one, look at like pros and cons, which is going to be the best, which has the, your decision might be based on which one has the potential absolute worst outcome. You know, if this fails, you know, if we cut the yellow wire, everything's going to blow up. You know, you probably want to leave that option out, you know, cutting the yellow wire. So then you're gonna, once you've got your alternatives, you got to pick one. So you select your alternative. At that point, you implement your decision and then you evaluate your decision. Was it successful? What, hey, does this remind y'all of anything? API, there you go. You see that ending? Implement, evaluate. It ends the same way. The same thing though. If you think about it, look at your steps. You have to assess basically what's the issue. You're making an assessment. You assess to find out what the issue is. Then you got a plan, and that's where you're doing your brainstorming and looking at alternatives and things like that. I'm beating this thing to death with my watch. I'm sorry, it's bothering me. It's probably not, y'all probably hadn't even hardly noticed, but it's about to kill me. That's your P part when you're doing your evaluating alternatives and exploring alternatives and selecting alternatives. Once you select it, you implement it, and then you evaluate. See how API plays into like so many things that we do, and how I tell people when I talk to them about the program, look, whether you do recreation therapy, we're going to talk about some things that are going to carry over that you can use. It's true. This has nothing to do with actual recreation therapy activities right here. This is about managerial, making decisions. And it goes to show you how API is a valid chain of command of process. Now, sometimes we have the opportunity to make decisions in groups, which is great. I just got an email. I checked it right before class. I got an email that I am helping to be on a hiring committee for someone they're trying to hire in gerontology. Perfect example of a group decision-making technique. We'll be sitting around talking about the people that have put in applications and things like that. I haven't even had a chance to read the email to see what all I have to do it, but I told her that I would, so that decision is made. See how that was a personal decision I made. Now we had to make a group decision. So group decisions, they're more creative usually and accurate than individual decisions. Why do you think so? I want to address both parts of that. Why are they more creative? Yeah, you got more minds working at it. Absolutely. More ideas coming from more people, different viewpoints. Different people have different life experiences, so you're going to have different thoughts. Everybody's different, and sometimes you have people that are really strong creative thinkers and throw out so many ideas, you just want to be like, shut up, that's enough. You know, I'm sure y'all have all dealt with that person. They're more creative. Why would they be more accurate than individual decisions?
Have the same ideas, they can like validate each other.
Yeah, validation is absolutely a key. That's not quite where I was thinking, but you're exactly right.
Would it be accountability? Does that play a role in that?
It does, along the same line of what he was saying. Where my thought went on this is that, okay, if you make a decision and you really come to a decision, don't you always want to think that you're right and you made the best decision that there is, right? Like if you make a decision, you have to, and you're going to follow through on it, you have to buy into it, right? So sometimes that might cloud your accuracy because you want your decision to be the right one. When you have a group to discuss, to form that accountability, then you're going to be more accurate because you have that, more than one person looking at things and being honest with each other. So that's plays a role. So that's good. The good thing about group decisions. Now, what do you have to be able to do group decisions? There's one word that I'm thinking of. Well, a leader is absolutely, somebody's gonna have to take the lead role, but that's not the one. Starts with a T. If you don't have much of it, you better not be trying to do a group decision.
Teamwork.
Time. No, you see where I'm coming from with that? If you're gonna have a group decision, you have to have time for brainstorming, you have to have time for communication, you have to have time to throw things around, to talk about whether this is a good thing, whether this is a bad idea, to get new ideas, to talk about how it can be implemented. If there is an emergency type situation, like say, you work at a facility and there's like an active shooter situation. Let's talk about, real life scenarios that happen these days in this world. If there's an active shooter situation, you're gonna call a group together to come up with a decision of what the best plan of action is? No, somebody's gonna be barking out some orders and telling folks what to do. Individual decision from the top of somebody who is authoritative enough to get it done. See what I'm saying? Time, if something is quick deadline and you don't have time, sometimes you can't play the goal, the group decision technique because you don't have the time. You have to be quick, and that makes it a situation where you don't have time for these things that are fostered in group decision making, like are listed here. Interaction groups, brainstorming, we talked about that. We know what that is. That's just throwing ideas up. Everybody, no matter how, good brainstorming is like, no matter how outlandish the idea might be, throw it out there. Let's get 100 ideas, brainstorming. Nominal group technique, the Delphi group technique, and electronic meetings. That's another thing that is good. I'm not going to talk much about the nominal group or the Delphi group. Y'all can go into the book and read on that. Electronic meetings, that is very valid in today's world, especially. They're having a seminar for SRA students Friday, I think, and they sent out a Zoom link for it. And y'all haven't seen it, y'all SRA students, and you haven't seen it? It went out from Tayon. Oh, you need to see it. Maybe try to remind me at the end of class. I'll try to copy it and post it here for y'all. If you're not an SRA student, disregard that if I put it on here, okay? It's just going to be for people that are in SRA. Deal? Y'all remind me now or I won't do it. I promise my memory's about like that, especially today. But electronic meetings, that's group decision. You can get people that aren't even in the same zip code working on a group decision, which is nice. And it's become very common these days, obviously. So, analytical decision-making tools. There's some tools out there that visualize alternatives. And the tools that we use for that are a lot of times are computers, because computers are smarter than we are most of the time, and they have formulas that are put in, and they can run things and spit out answers that our minds can't even think about doing. They can simulate models to examine the consequences of alternatives. Gosh, what they do every year, they get like the Madden game and play the whole season out to see who's going to be in the Super Bowl and let it run on like computer AI. Stuff like that. It's kind of funny how a lot of times it's pretty accurate. too. Sometimes it's not, but a lot of times it's pretty doggone close, and it shows you how smart computers can be. And it's kind of good that we have that technology, and it's kind of scary in a way too. There's potential for it to make us obsolete one day if the need for people, I saw a robot on a video the other day that was so lifelike that, they're making robots now that will talk to you, they start to learn you, they have emotions. Like, this is getting into some weird things now. I can't imagine like being in the grocery store and walking up on a robot, trying to fight me over ramen noodles. We don't want to do that. All right, there's some techniques that you use when you're talking about computers. Decision grids, Gantt charts. You guys have probably heard of Gantt charts before. Consequence tables. I like the title of that because that's one of the main things we have to base decision on, the consequences. Like I said, sometimes the best choice is the one with the safest consequence. Depending on your situation, that might be what you need to base it on, Decision trees, which is kind of like a flow chart type deal. Performance evaluation and review technique, critical path method. That's talked about in the book deeper. Problem solving, there's a gap existing. There's a gap between existing and desired states in so many things. And API and discovery of an answer to a problem are similar processes. We talked about how that is tied together and how it's so similar and how in the way it's formulated and the way it happens. We have to define a problem, gather and analyze info, develop solutions to it, then we make a decision, and then there we go again. We're going back over the same information, but it's important and the main steps and good important information for you to remember. Test time. Then you're going to implement the decision and evaluate the decision. If it was a good decision, go with it. If it was a bad decision, why was it bad? What can we do to tweak it? How can we make it better? What can we improve upon? The same way we do when we're talking about recreation therapy programming for our clients. Once we implement our plan, we evaluate it to see if it worked. Did they reach their goals? Did they reach their objectives? Was it too easy? Was it too hard? What was the outcome? What do we need to do moving forward? Same thing when we're problem solving at work. We look at the same things. Well, what we want is to reach successful solutions. Personal values and life experiences contribute to generating alternatives. That's basically what I was talking about. The more experiences you've had, the more people that are available, your values play a big role in decision making. What you truly believe is going to make a big, it's going to make decisions for you on a personal level, whether it's, going to church, whether it's about vaccines, whether it's about abortion, whether it's about all of these things that are in this world right now that are kind of out there. Your own personal values and life experiences, things that you have been exposed to and dealt with, are going to contribute to generating alternatives when you're trying to come up with decisions. And given the same circumstances, people might respond differently because people perceive and evaluate differently. So two people aren't going to make the same decision because they're going to see things differently. Now, the same person on a given day might make a different decision if presented with the same thing, depending on, how their day is going, how clearly they're thinking that day. It's basically saying one person might not make the same. If you took a identical test 2 days in a row, it's not necessarily even knowledge based. Just say it was asking things like favorite color, which car would you choose out of these? Would you rather go to a beach or a mountain or a, you know what I'm saying? Like a bunch of questions like that are kind of, you know, just personal choice, and it's all about how you're feeling. Do you think you would do that test the same 2 days in a row? Nope. I guarantee you, you would not. I mean, unless you were very staunch on your answers, you know, something's going to be going different in your day that's going to change that. So circumstances can change the way people respond and evaluate things. Creative managers are comfortable with uncertainty. They're still able to generate relevant solutions, even though that there's some degree of uncertainty. That's, you know, you've got to be creative. You got to have options. You got to have a plan B. You got to have, what can we jump to if this happens? You know, where can we, what's the bailout plan? You create relevant solutions, and you see that it has an S on the end, solutions. That means you kind of have more than one. That means you have options. If you've got solutions, you have more than one. Now you have to choose one direction to go, but that doesn't mean that you can't turn if something starts going awry. That's kind of the point here. All right, something that happens, factual, I'm telling you, it is common, more common than you would even like to believe. Conflict management. You will have to deal with it as a manager. If you are ever if you are a manager at a, I almost said at a Blockbuster. They don't even have Blockbusters anymore. If you are a manager at a Blockbuster, you would have to deal with conflict resolution and conflict management. Sorry, it's just the truth. And it's just an accepted consequence of people working together. When you say you're gonna go on a trip, you take off on a trip, you got 5 or 6 of you packed into a little car, you're excited, you're having a good time, you go to your place, you stay 4 or 5 days, y'all do everything together. By the time you're coming home, y'all don't even want to look at each other. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's just, that's the way it is. People working together, especially when you're around each other all the time. You know how brothers and sisters, you go, you always squabbling about something. When you're around somebody, as much as you can be around people at work, you're going to run into even just that, you know, and those can be some of the most silly things, but they can turn into a big disruption at work. Because if you can't work together, then it's messing up the whole picture. That's got to be squashed. Conflict is reason for change in people and organization. Conflict is a warning to the manager that something is amiss. If you've got conflict, something is amiss, obviously. I mean,
I have a question with that. How can people that are qualified to be managers and have a good attitude be managers, even if they have are shy or can't, produce conflict? How do they handle conflict even though they're right for the job?
That's something that you're going to be trained for to a degree. Like when you come in, if it's done properly, you'll have some training done for conflict resolution, and it will be based on what we talked about a few slides ago, like that P&P manual, the policies and procedures. And the easiest way for someone who is shy and not one to jump in there and want to say, hey, stop it, you know, that's not your personality. And you go by the book, you go by the personnel, the procedures and personnel manual. You sit down and it says, if this happens, you do this. You call the offender into the office. You have a sit down with them. At the end of the session, you have them write out a statement, and then you both sign it and date it. That's your first step. And then you've got documentation. You have followed the thing. You haven't done anything to piss them off because it's in the book. They have their own copy. you're not going over and above. All you're doing is say, look, according to the PNP manual, me and you have to have a meeting now. That's it. And that's, you don't have to be outgoing to do that, to follow by the step-by-step instructions for what to do to help de-escalate. That's my best answer to that, is you should have some training up front, and you should have laid out in front of you, this is what you do when this happens. And if not, use your other managers above you as a resource. Call them and say, hey, I've got this going on down here. What do I need to do? That's their job. If you've got a manager above you, use them, call them, get their answer. They may come down there and help. You know, it might take it out of your hands if you're not comfortable with it. Unresolved conflict goes underground, which means it becomes kind of that little smoldering thing that's just still there. Eventually, the big bright flame of it goes out, but you got this kind of just head button that's going on that you don't have the same dynamics. People aren't getting along as well. You're not getting as much productivity. And that's what's happening when the conflict goes too long and is unresolved. Motivation is negatively impacted. Productivity is negatively impacted. You see declines in both of those. And when you see decline in motivation, you're going to see a decline in results. When you see a decline in productivity, who's going to get in trouble? The manager, probably. Because what's going to say productivity is down because your people are quarreling and you know, they have this conflict, they've lost their motivation. Somebody above you is going to come to you and say, they're not going to go around and ask the other 10 rec therapists what's going on. They're going to come to you and say, how come y'all aren't seeing as many patients right now? How come we're not meeting as many goals? What's going on? You're going to be the one to catch it. So as a manager, you have to make sure that if at all possible, conflict gets resolved. Sometimes, you know, are you always going to be able to do that? No, sometimes we can't. I mean, if two people get to where they hate each other, like hate, you can't make them stop. You know, you two like each other. Put on, here's a 3X shirt. I want y'all to wear this all day at work. You can't do that. I can do that to my kids, but you can't do that to your workers. You know what I mean? The little thing where you make them wear a shirt together or the same pair of pants, and y'all are gonna learn to love each other. It doesn't work like that. You know, you do your best to resolve it. If you have people that have a conflict that don't work well together, that's where, when we were talking about scheduling and things like that, planning as a manager, you may need to be honest with them and say, look, you two aren't getting along. I'm going to start scheduling y'all separately. If y'all, you know, if you don't like your schedules, start getting along. If you want to go back to how it was, then y'all start working well together and show me that you can do that, and we can talk about going back. Otherwise, I have to assume the role of making sure that we're productive and that we're meeting the needs of our clients. That's all there is to it. So where does conflict come from? What are the sources of conflict? Increases in organizational complexity and specialties. Like if you pick up new things that you're starting to do in your facility, say you started a new equine therapy, hippotherapy program, there's going to be some stress there. You got people that don't like horses, scared of horses. You think they're going to be all happy and bubbly about jumping into a hippotherapy program? Some people are scared to death of a horse. I'm gonna be honest with you. I grew up with horses. I used to ride horses. I have a very high level of respect for them, and I'm damn near scared of them because they're huge. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, I used to mess with them a lot. I used to ride them. I used to go saddle it up. Of course, then four-wheelers came out, and when my granddaddy bought a four-wheeler, I stole it from him, and I never rode another horse. That's what happened with me and horses. But one day I was in the barn, and a horse kind of got out of control, and it smashed me between a door, like it kicked, and I was between the door, and a hoof print was like right here on the door that I was behind, and it smashed against my head, but the hoof print did not go through. Like the door was just thick enough that it protected, like to a stall in the barn. There was a perfect hoof print, like right here. He was about to knock my brains out the back of my head. That was when I got a very healthy respect for horses right then. I was like, you know what? Not my favorite animal anymore. Pretty sure he tried to kill me just now. You know, that's a good indicator that me and that horse had some conflict. I won't tell you how I responded to that conflict. I won that conflict though. And no, I did not shoot the horse or anything like that. But me and the horse had a little prayer meeting after that because you can't let them win. That was back in my old redneck days. I'm sorry. So when things become complex, you have new specialties, you're going to have people buck the system because they aren't comfortable with that. Scarce resources. People are complaining. They say, hey, we don't have enough materials. You want us to provide art therapy, but you're not. You want us to provide art therapy, but you're not giving us enough construction paper. You're not giving us crayons. You're not giving us markers. I mean, you don't pay us enough. How do you expect us to do this? You know, is that a source of conflict? Absolutely. And that's between them and you at that point, you know. So it happens. Scarce resources make people mad because expectations are still there. And, you know, I've done things in our other classes where I asked you guys to come up with ideas of things that you could do that didn't cost a lot of money, that you could do for recreation activities and things like that. That's specifically kind of for this reason, because depending on where you are at NMRC, when I was out there, you know, I've said this before, at one point it was the land of milk and honey. We had all the money we wanted. If I wanted it was almost to the point where we were so well funded by the state and all that if I would have went to them and said, you know what, I want to start riding these clients around on a gator. I need a gator. Okay, go get you one. I mean, like it was almost like that. Like we had money at one point out there to do. I took clients to Atlanta Braves baseball games in Atlanta from Oxford, stayed in hotels, bought meals. Like we had options, and that was living the life as in rec therapy now. Now those trips like that's community engagement and all. That's a good thing. You're teaching them some things, but that was just fun recreation trips that were part of the job. But I went from that to not having construction paper and cutting. We had the big rolls of colored paper and cutting it into the sizes that I needed to do crafts on. You know, like you never know, and it changes. And I've seen tons of resources and no resources, and they still expect results. The people above you still expect results. Personal and social relationships. You think those cause conflict? Sources of conflict? I think that's the number one source of conflict. To me, even the best relationships, you're going to have, you know, conflict come up. Off the job problems come to work. I've seen some of those. I've seen when Tammy was messing around, when Tammy was messing around with Bubba, and Bubba worked at the center and Tammy doesn't, but his wife Jolene worked at the center and Tammy showed up at the center to come after Jolene. Just saying. Of course that was real names, I'm sorry. No, that's off the job problems come to work. They follow you to work. You think that affected productivity? You think it caused a hell of a scene? You think the cops got called? Yeah, they did. Stuff like that happens more often than you would think. Now that's kind of an over the top example of off the job problems coming to work. That's even a situation where, I've had a terrible morning. I come to work, you ask me to help you set up an activity and I'm like, hell with you, I'm busy. And that's not normally how I am. How are you gonna feel about me at that point? Is that gonna make our relationship go pretty quick? That's because I had a flat on the way to work and I'm not mature enough to tell you, I really need a minute. I had a flat and I'm just kind of upset right now. Instead, I took it out on you. If I would have been more mature, that wouldn't happen. But I brought my off the job problem to work and it affected and caused conflict between you and I when all you needed was a little help and teamwork. So my bad. Workplace characteristics like change, increased workload, and teamwork. Who likes change? Nobody? Yeah, that's across the board. Most folks don't. That's common. Sometimes something to take to mind right here. Sometimes change is for the better. We talked about that, I think, in the last class. As a manager, when you have change, people are going to be resistant to it. People are going to give you conflict, like, why are we doing this? Why are we changing this? This is working fine the way it is. You have to, as a manager, find out a way to spin it in a positive note to make people buy what you're selling. Even if you're not the one selling it, it's not your baby, it's not your idea, but you have to get your team, you got to rally the troops and get them to buy into what you're doing. Change causes conflict. Increased workload. Everybody love getting extra workload put on you without additional pay. Y'all like that? Conflict. If you like working alone, you like being told that now you're going to be working in a team. Nope. Some people would want that. Some people don't want that. So teamwork sometimes, and teamwork brings in that differences in personality, differences in ideas. The more interaction you have, the more opportunity there is for conflict to happen. So in situations where you have teamwork, that's just a good possibility. If you want to look at conflict prevention and resolution, a manager who achieves organizational goals through individual goals might prevent conflict. So you've got organizational goals. Those are bigger goals. You know how we talked about goals and objectives and things like that, and how when you have a goal, you want to break it down into smaller pieces. That's kind of what this top one is talking about, y'all. A manager who achieves organizational goals, your big goals, by individual goals, which are smaller. You set smaller goals that help to reach these bigger organizational goals. People are seeing success. These things are attainable, like we talked about before, and that can help prevent conflict. When a manager accepts that differences are natural, that can help prevent conflict and help resolve conflict and be a tool to use when you're talking with two people who are butting heads. Say, look, we're not all the same. We're not all going to think the same. We're not all gonna feel the same. We need to realize that and we need to work together. But just remember that differences are natural. And you having a different opinion is natural, and that's okay. That's why y'all can stop being mad at each other and be mad at me, because I'm the one that's making the decision and this is what we're gonna do. At that point, that should kind of, like, seriously, if you go through a process like that, you tell them that, you make a decision, you take it off of them and say, y'all stop fighting. I just fixed, I just told you what we're doing. If you're gonna be mad at me. And that's okay. They won't stay mad. They know that's your job as a manager. You're gonna identify stages of conflict before intervening. They're listed in here. Here's one where I'm gonna give y'all a reading assignment. Read these things and understand them. These are the kind of things that are on the test. Latent, perceived, affective, overt, and aftermath. These are the stages of conflict, and you have to make a decision on when to intervene. As a manager, you don't want to be that manager that at the first sign of conflict, you stop what you're doing and jump in and try to put it out. That's not effective. It's not smart. It's not the best use of your time, because what's going to happen half the time? Yeah, it's going to work itself out. And you've made a bigger deal out of it by jumping in the middle of it. If you jump in too early, it needs to be starting to affect outcome, become apparent to other people, starting to be an ongoing problem, something like that, before you need to intervene. You don't jump in at the very first sign, okay? That's the main thing I want you to take from this, but I want you guys to go back and read about latent, perceived, effective, overt, and aftermath. This is kind of along the lines of what I'm saying, like, we're going to cover these chapters, but I'm not going into every single thing because it would take us forever. And that's why y'all got this good book. Y'all can read some, and I'll tell you the important parts like that. Conflict strategies, some things when you've got conflict on the table. Active listening, important. We talked about that. If somebody thinks you are actively listening to them, is it going to calm them down? Absolutely. If you feel like somebody is not actively listening to you, is it going to make you mad? Yes. That's why I hate the last 2 minutes of class. If I teach the whole class and people start putting their stuff in their backpacks, they're not active listening. I just want to scream sometimes. I know that's part of it, and I used to be out there and I used to do the same thing. Understand, I get it. Y'all ready to go. But there's an example of active listening and how conflict can be caused by doing it or not doing it. So if you're a strategy, if people feel like you are actively listening, you're actively engaged. And what is active listening? What are you doing if you're actively listening? Eye contact, nodding your head. You're not sitting there with your arms crossed and head down. You're probably, like, if you're sitting down, you're kind of leaned in, you're paying attention. There's strategies that they say are good for active listening. Some other things when you're trying to squash conflict: collaboration and problem solving. We know that that's the case. Another one, which I don't like, avoidance. If there's conflict, I think that's not a good strategy. Sometimes that's what people do when there's conflict. I've known people that, like Jolene and Tanya, or whatever their name was, they probably at work trying to avoid each other. Know what I mean? If they both work at NMRC and they're fighting over the same man, you think they try to run into each other on purpose? Probably not. That's an example of just avoidance to keep conflict from happening. They don't want to have a fist fight at work, so they avoid each other. That's not always a good option. That's not always possible. Smoothing and accommodating. That's your job as a manager, sometimes, to smooth things over, to accommodate people. to maybe make some compromises, to make them feel like you are on their side, that you're looking out for them. That can help, put down conflict. Compromise, one of the best conflict strategies there is. If you are having trouble with something and the person that you are having conflict with offers a compromise, and y'all can come to an agreed compromise, can y'all not agree that that's one of the best ways? Because you feel like you've both done your part. You've both either given up something or chose to give a little extra something. You're compromising. You're both part of it. You've made a decision. That is a great way to solve conflict. Competing and forcing. That's kind of hard to do. If there's true conflict, I mean, that's almost like threatening your job. Stop this or else. Y'all two can't get along here. Y'all arm wrestle. Whoever loses has to quit. I mean, you can't do that. It's out there as a conflict strategy. Y'all can read through some of these too. That's not going to be the examples that they use in the book, I wouldn't think. I usually don't go with the same ones they would use in the book. Looky here. Last slide. Resolution outcomes. When we're talking about conflict, there are win-lose results. These are usually found when you have to use force and competition, and the result is diminished cohesion. What's cohesion? Yep, togetherness. Diminished togetherness of your team. Remember our last class, we talked about how you wanted to strive to make your group into actually like a team. So when you use force, when you have people competing against each other to try to be, I'm going to be the best one or something like that to fix a conflict situation, you're going to have diminished cohesion. And that's going to result in a loss of managerial authority when you have that going on. Not good for anybody. There's not a lot going on. Lose-lose result. You're going to see from using compromise, accommodation, avoidance, and result in neither party solving the issue. If you use compromise, accommodation, avoidance, and it results in even and it's unsuccessful, then it is a lose-lose. If you have compromise and it's successful, it's one of the most positive ways that you can, fix conflict. Win-win result usually comes from collaboration, active listening, and the result is meeting all the needs. How y'all feel about that chapter? Decent stuff, useful. I promise you it's more useful than you probably even realize. You will deal with conflict. You will see it. She brought up a good question about what do you do if you're shy and you're not a aggressive type person. You're going to have strategies that are laid out for you to use in the case of when there's conflict. This is what you do. This is, and you need to be, if you're not trained in it, you need to be aware of, P&P manual on what to do in certain situations. And then if you follow that to a T, you're covering yourself. They can't be mad at you because all you're doing is following the rules. So it shouldn't turn into a long-lasting conflict that carries on if you're following what you were told to do from above. That's all we're going to do today. So I'm going to stop the share. I think we're going to do chapter 6 next class. Actually, y'all be watching your email. I'll let you know. We may stop here for the first test. I think there's 16 chapters in the